packages and submit and publish them with ESS-DIVE.
Great, thanks, Emily. And so we'll get things started off with a set of poll questions for you all before we dive into the content today. Just wanna, since there's some new names here too, it's gonna be interesting to just hear what you all are working on for these poll questions. And so starting things off, hopefully you should be able to see the little link towards the top of the screen where you can enter responses to this first poll question about your familiarity with ESS-DIVE. You can also enter by cell phone too, if that's your preferred method. Yeah, and here we just are wondering whether you've worked with ESS-DIVE before publishing data sets, as it looks like some folks have. Whether you're maybe a new registered contributor, but haven't done that data submission process, which we'll talk through today. So you're in a good place if that's where you're at. And if you're considering working with ESS-DIVE for publishing your data, that's also a great webinar for you. It's a good introduction. So looks like just over half have published data through ESS-DIVE before. See some movement on the poll here. Nice. All right, great. So a few folks have published data previously now, it looks like, whereas majority are either newly registered or haven't gone through the registration process yet to publish their data. Great. This is a perfect webinar for all of the above. Definitely, I think you'll all walk away learning something here, but especially those newer to ESS-DIVE, we're going through definitely some more of the basics material today. So this will be a good introduction to that. All right, thanks everyone. We've got a few more questions, so going to move on here. Emily, I'll turn it over to you for this one.
Oh, great. Yeah. So this is pretty straightforward. You can submit multiple terms if you'd like, but we'd just like to know in relation to publishing the data, which terms you're familiar with, which terms you've heard before, or maybe very well know the definition of. Cool. Yeah, it looks like everyone, a lot of metadata and data set familiarity. That's good. Great.
Data package, less so fair data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, really helpful to know. All right, moving on. So yeah, you could give us a sense of what kind of files you plan on submitting to ESS-DIVE in the future, or maybe that you have experience submitting over to ESS-DIVE before. And if we miss something in this list, definitely feel free to let us know in the chat too if you work with some type that we haven't thought of on this list. Lots of tabular data, different types of supporting information. A bit of scripts and coding notebooks, and then lower percent for different types of images, mapping, and model data. Okay. All right, and then our our last, since it looks like things have sort of leveled out here and we have a sense of what type of data you all plan on submitting, I'm going to move on to the last question, which is open response. What challenges do you face when creating your data sets, putting your data sets together, and like preparing them for submission? Or what challenges do you anticipate if you're new to ESS-DIVE or new to data repositories and archives in general?
Yeah, so some examples might be like splitting up if you have a large amount of data and you're not quite sure how to organize it, formatting files consistently, that's a good one. Also, collecting and managing and organizing metadata and making sure that you have all of the proper metadata for a data set. Good, yeah. Getting started, yeah. Yeah, hopefully you'll realize by the end of this that it's not as complicated as it might seem, and getting that once you know the process, it's definitely yeah, especially for metadata, we do have a pretty comprehensive set of requirements that are kind of there to help you along that process and make it as straightforward as possible.
Mm-hmm. And we'll be also describing some like templates and tools that we have that we're very happy to share with you and introduce you to today, that can hopefully help you with that inertia of getting started. All right, well, in the interest of time, we're going to keep moving on, but if other challenges or kind of sticking points come up, you definitely just let us know and we'll be happy to answer questions about that. Okay, so thank you all for participating in the poll and offering up your responses. So our overview of our presentation today, Emily is going to cover the sort of first 3 bullet points, which is the what and where to publish your data sets, some considerations when delineating multiple data sets that you might have for a project and preparing them for submission to ESS-DIVE, and then ultimately like sort of the nuts and bolts of how to publish your data set with us. And then I'll in the second half cover some of that formatting and describing the actual data files that you'll be submitting using file level metadata templates, and I'll describe that if that's a new term for you all, as well as those of you that work with tabular data, some guidelines and helpful documents for helping you format CSV files in a more consistent way. And we hope that you'll sort of walk away from this webinar today with a clear idea of how to organize some data files and package it up with metadata, and what happens after you request publication, some details about that publication process for you all, as well as I said, some instructions and documents about how to provide CSV files in a more consistently formatted way, as well as metadata about your individual files that can help make your data more reusable. All right, Emily.
Great, cool. Yeah, I'll take it from here. So this first section is mainly going to be talking about what to include in your data packages. So you can move forward, Rob. Great. So first off, here are some kind of important terms to keep in mind, specifically for the first part of our presentation. So I saw that in the poll, there was a bit more familiarity with the term dataset than data package. And you may actually see those terms used interchangeably. Each refers to a collection of data files and their relevant metadata, which are then packaged together and can be published and stored in a data repository, such as ESS-DIVE. And then metadata is a crucial part of these packages. It provides information that's vital to the use and reuse of the data, such as the purpose, the contents of the data files, the methods of data collection, and more. And lastly, publishing data packages with a digital object identifier, which it seemed like a good amount of you were familiar with. It allows users to access your data through an unchanging persistent identifier. And we're going to move on, but you can find more definitions of important terms in our glossary on our website. And please feel free to answer or to enter any questions in the chat that our team can help answer throughout the presentation. Can move on. Great. So there's multiple reasons for beginning the publication process for your data. You may be storing data that's related to a publication, and this could be to meet the requirements of a journal, or you could be publishing data to comply with your project's data management plan. Publishing your data in ESS-DIVE also allows you to easily share your data with your community, and it ensures that your data can be used by future scientists. And it also promotes fair data practices. So FAIR, which you also saw in the poll, it stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And these are all characteristics of high quality data that ensure the usability of your data. Move on to the next. Great. So when you have a large amount of data, it can become difficult to split and organize the data into data sets, and failing to package the data properly may leave users with too much or too little information. So because of that, we recommend that you use these guidelines when packaging your data. And after reviewing all of these, it's also important to just consider how your data will be used by those who may be unfamiliar with your project, and just making sure that you include all the information that you think that they would need. So we can move on to the next. So before we dive into the contents of data sets, here's kind of an overview of the main steps to requesting publication, which begins with collecting and organizing your data files. If you want to just click through, Rob, yeah. And then after ensuring that your data belongs in ESS-DIVE, you will register as a data contributor. Will finally allow you to publish your data along with its relevant metadata. So that's the last one. Perfect. Then moving on. Then you can just click through a few times, Rob. Great. So there are two core components of a data set. If you're publishing a data set that's associated with a paper, the data files should include all relevant data, all data relevant to the scientific findings and the figures and tables in the paper. And all data files that are necessary for the replication of these findings should be included, even if not associated with a paper. And next, the metadata supports the reuse of your data by providing users with all information necessary to understand and interpret the data, which we covered a little bit earlier. So we can move on. Great, so here's some common data file types that are acceptable to include in your data sets. And a combination of these data file types can be used to create a more holistic view of your data. And while the data file types you choose will depend on the type of data that you're archiving, ESS-DIVE does require that non-proprietary file formats be used as much as possible. And this will essentially ensure that your data remains usable, even if a certain software such as Microsoft Excel one day becomes obsolete. Move on. Sorry, I kind of lost my slide. Oh, gosh, okay. Yeah, so these are just a few of the metadata fields that are required by ESS-DIVE. So titles will allow the users to have just a snapshot of a descriptive overview of the data package. An abstract is extremely important to provide the purpose, contents, and instructions for data use. Keywords allow for users to search for your data package, and location, including latitude, longitude, and a proper description, are also very important, as well as methods, which is surprisingly a field that is commonly left blank or without enough detail. And finally, including authors in order of contributions is really important to allow users to reach out to contacts. And these core components are just a few of the metadata fields that are reviewed by the ESS-DIVE team during the publication process.
Emily, I was just going to see if we have any questions from the attendees about any of these components. Anyone? You feel free to use the hand raise or unmute. Just want to give a chance to see if there's any questions quick.
Yeah, definitely. And if you do have any at any point, you can also put them in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Right, I don't see any hands raised, so I'm gonna keep.
Great. Yeah, so you can click one forward. Great. So ESS-DIVE uses a combination of automated and manual review workflows in our standardized dataset review process. So first, a metadata assessment report, which you see here, is automatically generated for each dataset that's submitted. And we highly recommend that you review the results of this assessment and resolve any of the failed requirements before moving on to requesting publication. And then next, your data set will move through a manual review process where a member of the ESS-DIVE team will check that your data set meets all standardized metadata criteria. And the outcome of these reviews are recorded. And what we found is that we most commonly require revisions to the abstract content, the methods content, which I mentioned earlier, and we frequently ask for the addition of non-proprietary file types. We can move forward. Now, after you've gotten your data set together and you've even submitted your data set, what happens when you are ready for publication? So once you have finished this and you have reviewed the quality of your metadata using the metadata assessment report, you're ready to request publication. So feedback generated from the manual dataset review are going to be sent directly to you through email, and revision requests must be resolved before publication. Then once you have responded and addressed this feedback, you can edit and resubmit your data set and then actually get back to us. And then it will be reviewed again before final approval for publication. And at any point during this process, you are very much encouraged to contact us for one-on-one support. We're always here to help you. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there are two options for creating and actually editing data packages with ESS-DIVE. So the one that you've seen screenshots throughout this presentation is the web upload form. So this allows you to manually enter data package metadata on ESS-DIVE, one data package at a time. You will be able to drag and drop or select files from your file manager to upload the data. Alternatively, you can also use the package service API, which is a programmatic method for creating and editing data package metadata on ESS-DIVE. So whichever one you use is up to you. In the past, most use cases for the package service API are for projects who are uploading multiple data sets with very similar or identical metadata. Can move forward. Great. And lastly, ESS-DIVE offers multiple resources to support you throughout data creation and publication. You can visit our help documentation and video tutorials, and all of our past webinars as well are also available on our YouTube channels. You can also collaborate with team members to create metadata using our offline metadata guide, which also will include all of our requirements for metadata in the actual template. And you can also practice uploading data sets using our sandbox testing server at any time. And any data that you put onto that testing server will not become public. So you can practice as many times as you would like. And of course, as I mentioned throughout the presentation, you can reach out to the ESS-DIVE team at absolutely any time. So now I'm going to pass it on to Rob to kind of discuss how to use ESS-DIVE's reporting formats to increase the quality and usability of your data. Thanks. And I do also, sorry, I will pause. Are there any questions at this point in our presentation? Also, these slides will become available. So any of the links that you see here, you'll be able to follow. Great. All right, well, it looks like we're all good, Rob.
Okay, great. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, happy to answer any questions throughout. Please add them to the chat or use the raise hand because I can actually see it while I'm doing screen share too. So, all right. So next up, I'll discuss some reporting formats, which is just a sort of general term for guidelines and templates that we have for you that can help you format your data in a way to make it more easily findable and reusable by other researchers after you upload your data to ESS-DIVE. We'll be focusing on a couple of reporting formats out of actually a set of 8 or so that we have through ESS-DIVE. So I'm focusing on reporting formats for CSV files, which are tabular data that it looked like from the polls a lot of you are actually working with, and a reporting format for file level metadata, which is going to apply to a lot of different file types. And we'll go into those terms a little bit more if they're unfamiliar to you. But first, some poll questions. So if you have the tab up still, you should be able to navigate over to that. And then there are instructions at the top of this slide for where to go to respond. Just first wondering what type of data you typically collect or work with. This is sort of a free form answer here. And it could be, really general. I collect ecological data, sample data, whatever kind of data you typically work with, just wondering. Great, I see a couple of microbiome, microbiochemical. Yeah, great, okay. So nice, microbiome also, great. Yeah, so there are reporting formats that are being developed honestly in sort of each of these fields through ESS-DIVE and the community partners that we work with and the genome. Great. The ones I'm talking about today are general enough that they actually should apply to all of these types here, whether you format your data in tabular form or these file level metadata will apply to each file that you submit to ESS-DIVE, and I'll describe those in a little bit. Okay, thanks. It's helpful to hear where you all are coming from with your research focus. Next up, are you familiar in your line of work with data standardization practices generally? I'm going to assume that we're getting a lot of somewhat responses instead of just one person clicking somewhat. So it seems like most people are a little bit familiar with the idea of data standardization, which is great. yeah, this is very much a kind of intro to data standardization type of talk. And then another free form kind of answer, when you collect your data, whether you're actually collecting your data in notebooks or entering it in a spreadsheet or getting model output, say, how do you decide how you're going to organize and format that data? Is it, I'm just wondering, is it something that you get guidance from, I don't know, supervisors, organizations that have collected this data before? How do you know how to, or is it something you just sort of came up with and have stuck with? So how do you decide how you're organizing your data? I see discussion with team. What seems easiest for the user? Yeah, having like ease of use in mind is really important. Journal recommendations, what other publications are doing. Other data types, yeah. Great, okay. Thanks, it's helpful to see sort of that some groups are looking at, what others in their field are doing and keeping user ease, usability in mind. Yeah, based on, where the data are collected out in the field. Great, okay. Excellent. Okay, thanks for all your responses here and setting up this conversation on data formatting and sort of data standardization. We'll go into that a little bit more if this is a new concept. And it did seem from the poll like folks were somewhat familiar, at least with this idea. But if you're not, don't worry, we're going to get started with some of the kind of building blocks of standardizing certain types of data. So this figure you saw on Emily's portion of the webinar today, and we're going to really zoom in on one particular component of your data sets or data packages. And those are the individual data files that make up your data package data sets. So we'll look at ways of formatting your files so that other researchers can have an easier time of both locating your data and reusing that data once they download it and start to incorporate it into their own work. Examples of the data files, what we could consider data files, are listed here in this yellow box in the slide. CSV files, which we'll focus specifically on today, but also when I talk about data files, I'm talking about things like images, code, KML kind of shape files for maps. So if you work with any of these data types, this material today is for you. These reporting formats are sort of guidelines that I'll discuss today were developed by a team of researchers at Oak Ridge National Lab, who I have pictured on the slide here. So I definitely want to give all the credit to them for working on this over a couple of years. The first of the reporting formats that we'll discuss today are guidelines for formatting your CSV files. And as part of this format, which was developed not only by this team here, but through surveys they did with other communities of researchers, and it went through several rounds of iterations. They ultimately make some recommendations for how to format things like the header row in your CSV file, that top level row where you might list out some of your variables, how to list out your temporal data and format temporal data, and how you might want to indicate missing numeric and text values in your spreadsheets. For each of the formats, I'm going to have kind of a similar layout to the slides, I want to make sure that you all walk away from this knowing what the format is, it's the motivation for why they created it. And then also why you might want to use the format in your own work, why you might want to adhere to some of these guidelines in your own work, and what that can enable. So for the CSV reporting format, they focused on CSV files because it is, as Emily was talking about earlier, that non-proprietary format for tabular data that may outlive other programs, other file formats that rely on certain proprietary file formats. They aimed for some guidelines that would help us archive tabular data in its simplest form, but one that's still extremely usable by other researchers. And they did some work to define structure and some content you would include in your CSV files. And why use the format? Well, using this format will make CSV files easier to read and understand by human users that download your CSV files, and also by computers. That's this term, machine readability. It'll help. They make some recommendations that make it so that when you might want to read in a CSV file into your R script or R programming environment, it makes it easier to use so we don't get as many errors when trying to read in these files. And lastly, it'll help reduce inconsistencies across data sets, like I have pictured here, some inconsistencies in how dates and times are formatted. So here's a really broad overview of the type of guidelines that team from Oak Ridge established. They make recommendations about how to name CSV files, how to just create a file name for your CSV, where to list out units, and more. I should say that lots of these are simply recommendations, not absolute requirements by any means, but they more recommend how you might want to format your data to make it more usable. And I provide a link here, and these will all be clickable in the PDF form of this presentation. So I put them there for you to use afterwards if you want to get into the documentation that this team created and all of the definitions for these terms and guidelines that I list out here. And just to close out the CSV reporting format portion here, I wanted to show an example of a well-formatted data file according to their CSV guidelines that they created. And just to highlight a few examples, they make recommendations for when you have latitude as a variable in your spreadsheet, calling it just latitude simply, and providing latitude in decimal degrees. They also recommend putting the units of that variable in the second row right under the header. And then you can see here they recommend formatting date in this year, month, day format, and that's according to like this standard called ISO. And so moving on, oops, sorry about the barking up here. Just a second. So moving on here, I just want to see if we've got any. That was just a quick overview of an example of the reporting format and how it actually looks when we, we've all worked with CSV files, and they offer just some little modifications that can help make that file a bit more usable and readable by machines and humans. So I do want to do a quick check and see if there are questions about those CSV guidelines or recommendations. And I can't see the chat, so if anyone has recommendations for that or any questions, sorry, just.
I was just going to ask Eric Roden, UW-Madison here. How will we get a hold of the PDF of today's presentation? Oh,
well, we'll definitely post it on our web. We have a webinar page on ESS-DIVE's website.
Okay. Yeah. Got it.
Joan, did you have any other ways we're going to send this around or anything?
No, we just always put it on our webinars page, and I can put the link. Oh, Charlie put that link in the chat too. So that should be posted soon after this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Eric. And yeah, those links should be nice and clickable, because I'm just going to scatter some links throughout these slides here for each of these formats. So yeah, thanks, Eric. Any other questions about the CSV guidelines here? All right, I'm gonna move on, and we should have plenty of time for questions at the end too. So next up are some recommendations for creating what's called a data dictionary. The data dictionary, you can think of it as simply a list of all of the headers in your CSV file. And this is a sort of separate spreadsheet from what we'll call that's a data file for your CSV, a CSV data file, but this is a separate table of information where you would provide for each of those parts of your header definition. It's a place you could provide units, the type of data that variable is, or that part of the header is. And so, yeah, for those of you who this concept is new, that's a data dictionary. It sort of accompanies your CSV data file. So what it is, it's a spreadsheet where you list and define all those terms in your column header. Like I said, variable name, provide that definition for the variable name, and units. It's a pretty simple, sort of minimalist kind of data dictionary spreadsheet. And we have templates for this as well that are downloadable, can fill in with your own information. And then why you might want to use this. This way that researchers who download your data file and the accompanying data dictionary, researchers can have more information and a clearer understanding of the different variables that appear in your data file. For example, you might have a column of temperature data in your data file, but in a data dictionary would provide a little more information, like a definition of temperature or how you recorded it, or any extra or units, for example, any extra information that might help a user of your data just know how you came about collecting that data. And then ultimately we envision a future search interface that could use data dictionaries to help people locate the exact type of variable with the exact type of units they might be looking for. This is not the data dictionary yet. This is an example data file. Should look sort of familiar with a column or variable names across the top, like date, latitude, longitude. And so to create a data dictionary, you would take this column header and enter that column header from your data file as the very first row of your data dictionary. And then you would provide, going across, units for that variable, definition, and a couple of other elements. And again, a lot of these are not required to take advantage and use the data dictionary, just a recommendation that the Oak Ridge team came up with. Again, we got for the data dictionary, we've got templates, and there you could, depending on how you want to structure your whole data package, you could provide a data dictionary, one for your entire data package, just summarizing all the variables that appear throughout your data package. Or if you want, you could create one dictionary for every single CSV file or data file you have, but that can grow to be quite a large number of files. So you might want to opt to just make one dictionary that sort of defines and explains all the terms that appear across your files. And then lastly, I want to talk about a reporting format for file level metadata. You can think of this as a spreadsheet that just lists out all the different files now that appear in your data package, along with a short description of that file, any dates that might be associated with the data you collected in that file, latitude, longitude, and a little bit more information. So file level metadata is maybe a new concept for some folks attending today. And just to provide a definition here, it's granular info focused on the file level instead of that higher up package level metadata like Emily was talking about. So it's still metadata, but instead of the data package where it's metadata about a file. And why provide it? Well, it helps people that want to reuse your data understand what's contained within a file without necessarily needing to like open that data file, inspect it, and sort through and figure out what's contained in there. Also down the road, we envision file level metadata, and folks that provide it in their data package enable automatic parsing of data files so that users can more easily search not just for the data packages they need and are interested in using, but for components of a data package, those data files within the package. And we've got, just want to bring these 2 bullet points up. Yep, we've got, of course, the Oak Ridge team created some really user-friendly templates and instructions and a guide on how to fill this all out. But I'll just show a quick screenshot of the file level metadata template here, where in that first column of the file level metadata template, you would list the first file in your data set or data package. They have this soil samples CSV file. And then in the second row there, you would list your other file that appears in your data package, provide a little description, and then we have a few more columns that are not pictured here that prompt you to provide maybe a UTC offset for the time zone where your data were collected, as well as latitude and longitude. I also want to highlight with the ease of use in mind and the user friendliness in mind, say you have a file soil samples that repeats over and over in your larger data package, we encourage the use of sort of wildcard symbols, that asterisk symbol, if your file level metadata appears, if same UTC offset, latitude, longitude, and all of that apply to multiple files, you can just use an asterisk to tell us, hey, soil samples file number 1, soil samples number 2, 3, and all of those, it has the same file level metadata for the most part. So there are some ways where you can not create many different rows for many data files. There's a little shortcut here. And with that, I just want to summarize the presentation today, which is from Emily's portion. We hope you have an understanding of how to organize data files and package them up with relevant metadata. We've gone through a little bit of the publication process and some of the metadata checks that go on during that publication process. And I've given you an overview of a couple of different reporting formats that can help make your data easier to find and reuse. I'm definitely happy to take any questions you have about reporting formats, and Emily's joined here, and we can take, yeah, if you have questions about reporting formats or content from earlier, happy to chat about those. And we've got some of the ESS-DIVE team on the call as well who can help answer some questions too. And while you all are thinking of questions, I'll do a quick mention of our upcoming webinars. At the end of September 28th, we're going to be talking about project portals and a new portals discovery tool. So we'll have a webinar focused on portals, and then we're going to talk. In later October, we're going to hear about the process of standardizing data using some of these reporting formats, more domain-specific reporting formats instead of these more general ones I went over today. And then at the end of November, we're going to talk about permission management for your data sets that are hosted on ESS-DIVE. That's a little preview. And then here's how to stay in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter. Got our mailing list, and you can always contact us over our support email.
Great, and I'm also adding to the chat. I know we have a lot of links in there for resources, but I'm also adding a link to our YouTube channel where the recording of this webinar is going to be posted, and all of our past webinars and some tutorials as well are posted.
Rob, are you opening it up to questions at this point?
Absolutely, yeah. Questions about any of the content we presented on today, or thoughts on the reporting formats or earlier material. Yeah, any questions you have, unmute, ask them in the chat.
So this is Charu, and I'm the lead of the community engagement team here at ESS-DIVE. And I have a question more for the audience than for the presenters here. As we start to plan out our events and outreach activities, we're really trying to help you adopt these standards in your research and in your data life cycles. And I was wondering if anybody had thoughts on, what can we do to help you start to use these reporting formats and start to, in fact, just use ESS-DIVE to submit data. We're always open to suggestions, but if there's something specific that can really help, even in terms of, coming and presenting at your project meetings or other things, that's just good for us to hear. So the easiest way for you all to kind of get started is actually just going to our website, and there's a documentation website that has various links. But there's this link to the support list. So if you're stuck at any point, and some of this, it might be hard for you to anticipate what you're going to run into until you start using these data formats, feel free to reach out to us at that support list, and we certainly will help respond to help you get started on these. Kathleen, go for it.
Yeah, so I had a question, because I am curious whether you guys are mainly interested in this for data sets going forward that we're currently collecting, or I have some old data sets from graduate school that I'm interested in making accessible. Obviously, if there's a big chunk of missing metadata, it's harder to go back and fill that in. But are you interested in people bringing data sets that are kind of already finished, have already been published, and putting them in this repository?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, absolutely. So the one constraint is if the prior work has been funded by an ESS project or not. If it's not funded by the DOE ESS program, you just have to send us a request to store prior data, and then establish a relationship with the ESS program. We do accept some on a case-by-case basis, data sets that are useful for the ESS science, even if it was not DOE funded. But those you have to actually send us a support request for that purpose. So yes, we can take past data. In fact, we have had at least one project that ended, a few years ago, and they just wanted to store a place to store and make their data public, and they did it after 3 or 4 years, and had a student organize all the data and submit the data. So absolutely, that's fine. That's fine if you want to do that. Just as a comment for projects, so most of these reporting formats that we're rolling out, the CSV, the file level metadata, most of that is applying to data sets going forward. So as you're thinking about new data collection campaigns, I think it is eventually going to start becoming a requirement in subsequent FOAs that these reporting formats are adopted. But as of now, it's optional for you to use it for past data, because we do recognize that if you have data sets that are already assembled and close to publication, it's going to be some effort to convert those. to these standards. So it's not a requirement. It's just, it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. Does that help answer your question?
Yep, thanks.
Yeah. So Joan, do you want to just, Rob, if you want to move up to the webinars, just give a couple, maybe Joan can just give a short description of what the upcoming webinars are, just so people can gauge what are the next related things they might want to be attending.
Sure. Yep. There you go, Jim.
Yeah, so in general, we're doing webinars now the last Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. And so at the end of September, we'll be doing one on project portals and our new portals discovery tool, which will be released soon. And then October 26th will be a few individuals who have used our reporting formats to standardize their data. And so they'll be presenting on how they did that and their experiences there. And then on November 30th, we're planning to do a webinar on dataset permission management.
In that webinar on the 26th, we'll have an example of converting kind of a previous, like Kathleen was talking about, converting a previously collected data set so that it adheres to both a water quality reporting format as well as CSV. And yeah, you'll hear some of the process and amount of time it took the intern that we had working with us to do those conversions.
While we're waiting for other questions, do you want to give a description of what project portals are so they know whether they want to come to the September 28th webinar?
Charlie, do you want to take that?
Sure. So project portals are a way of organizing your project's data. And actually the portals feature that we have is a feature that enables you to create any collections of data. So it doesn't have to be specific to a project. It could even be a thematic portal. But yeah, it's a way where you can just give someone a link and that would basically get them to just your relevant data collection without having to search or filter through all the data sets on ESS-DIVE. What we now have a new feature that's going to roll out where basically people can now see the list of portals that have been created on ESS-DIVE. Previously, you just had to know the link, but now people can search and find different portals. So it's a way, the portals also have things like metrics, like the number of data sets that are published under that particular project, or the number of downloads, especially for your data management plans and for your organization. It's really a nice way to curate your project's data collection under one link. If you want to put a link on your project website saying, here's our data, that's another handy link to use directly. So yeah, we're going to go through in that webinar details about how you can create your own project portals, brand them for your own project using your icons, color schemes, whatever you want, and have more custom filters to just create that collection just the way you want it. And then walk you through this new tool that we're rolling out that enables you to find project portals. So thank you very much for attending the webinar. I think hopefully you learned some things from today about how to submit data, how to start using standards to make your data more fair, and what kinds of data formats we're supporting on ESS-DIVE. As I mentioned earlier, we're always looking for suggestions on things that we could do to help you adopt these standards in your science and your projects, as well as anything that we can do to enable you to publish your data more smoothly on ESS-DIVE. So thank you all for attending, and thanks to Rob and Emily for presenting today.
Yep, thanks so much, everyone. Reach out to us if you have any questions about the material from today. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay.